Hello and welcome to the class. My name is Paddy. Today we're going to be looking at part 3 of the speaking test. After you watch this class, if you have any questions for us, remember that you can click on the chat icon at the top of your page there. If you click on that icon, you'll be able to send us a message with any questions that you have. This is the first class of 2 classes, and this video will last around 20 minutes. First, we're going to look at the types of question you might get in speaking part 3, and then we're going to look at some examples of useful language to use. So by the end of this video, you'll be more prepared for what to expect in part 3. During this video, there will be some questions for you to answer. You can find these questions below the video. I will tell you when you need to answer the questions, and I'll give you about 10 to 15 seconds to do so. Okay, let's get started. So, what is Speaking Part 3? Speaking Part 3 is a continuation of the topic of Part 2. It will expand upon this topic and ask more general questions about it. These issues will be global issues, so they require you to think about society or the world in general, not yourself specifically. It will test your ability to talk about subjects in more complex detail, so to develop arguments and to think of causes and effects in a little bit more of an advanced way. It will also test your ability to use a slightly wider range of vocabulary and grammar on these topics. So part 1, your answers will be generally more simple grammar, past simple, present simple, maybe some present perfect, but part 3, you'll be using perhaps some more conditional tenses. Have a look at these 3 questions. I'd like you to decide which of them do you think is more likely to be a part 3 question. A. Describe a person who inspired you. B. What can be done to encourage people to recycle more? And C. How do you usually travel to work or school? Look at the first question below this video and choose the option which is more likely to be a part 3 question. B is a part 3 question. What can be done to encourage people to recycle more? So this is asking you to think about the global issue of recycling and the environment and to propose solutions to this issue. A is more of a part 2 question. So it's asking you about something personal in your experience that you'd have to talk about in a little bit of detail. Part 3 questions, of course, relate to part 2. So if it's talking about a person that inspired you for part 2, then maybe a part 3 question could ask about celebrities. Do you think celebrities have too much influence today, for example? C is, of course, a part 1 question. It's a personal question about you, your life, your habits, and your routines. So what kind of questions can we expect in part 3? Well, one way to categorize questions is by vocabulary topic. And the other way is by grammatical function, so the kind of grammar you can expect to use in the types of question. Let's think about those grammar types. First of all, we have questions about the past, questions that ask you to talk about how people used to live in history. Some questions ask you to make predictions about the future. What do you expect to happen in the next 50 years? Something like this. There will be imaginary questions or hypothetical questions. These will be questions asked in the second or third conditional, asking you to imagine a reality where something is true. Opinion questions. These will be questions that ask for your personal opinion directly. In fact, most part 3 questions are about your view and about your perspective on something, but opinion questions are specifically asking for your personal view. Questions that ask you whether you agree or disagree with a statement are also common. So the examiner will tell you something and ask you whether you think that's true or false. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? And of course, give your reasons why. There will be questions asking you to compare two or more things. Of course, here, the grammar involved will be about comparative forms, superlative forms, and many others. Talking about cause and effect. Maybe they'll give you a situation in the world and ask you to describe the causes of that situation and to describe the effects of that situation. Advantages and disadvantages. So you'll be presented with a topic and asked to list the advantages and disadvantages of it. Compare and contrast the positive aspects and the negative aspects. And problem and solution. You will be presented with a problem and asked what you think the solutions to that problem could be. Again, this could be a conditional, imaginary situation, or it could be a real situation. So let's look at some example questions and think about what kind of grammar or function these questions are categorized as. Number one, what are the pros and cons of cheap international tourism? So what category would this question fit into? Well, this is an advantage and disadvantage question. There are many synonyms of advantage and of disadvantage, and it's good to try and learn these. Pros and cons are two examples of synonyms. So in this question, you should list some of the positive aspects of cheap international tourism and also mention some of the negative aspects of it. Now I'm going to show you some more questions. I would like you to decide which of these categories these questions fall into. It could be one or maybe two categories. Question 2. How have lifestyles changed over the last 40 years? Look at the next question below this video and choose which type of question is this. In this case, it is two categories. Select the correct options. Question 2 asks you to talk about the past, so 40 years ago, and it's asking you to make a comparison. So anything asking about how has something changed, you should talk about how things used to be, what people would do back in the past, and what people are currently doing or what people generally do today. So there needs to be comparison there as well as talking about the past. 3. Do you think the world would be better if everyone had a free university education? What kind of question is this? Look at the next question below this video and choose the two correct options. So this is an imaginary question. We can see the word would in there, so it's a second conditional. Can you imagine the world as being better or worse if everyone had a free university education? So to respond to this question, you should also use a second conditional sentence. It's also an opinion question. Do you think? So it's asking for your personal view. It's not asking for an academic, evidence-based response. 4. How will technology change our lives in the future? What kind of question is this? Look at the next question below this video and select the correct option. This is, of course, a future question. It's asking for your prediction about how life will be different. So for this question, you want to be using be going to and will for future predictions, maybe some future perfect and future continuous, and maybe some expressions like I would expect that or it is predicted that. Number 5, what can be done to help people who are unemployed? What kind of question is this? Look at the next question below this video and choose the correct option. This is a problem and solution question. So the problem is some people are unemployed, and the question is asking you, what can we do to help these people? What is the solution to their problem? So again, notice how in the question it doesn't say what is the solution. You have to figure out what the question is actually asking you to do. 6. Do you agree that art is inaccessible to most? What kind of question is this? Look at the next question below this video and choose the correct option. This is an agree or disagree question. So the statement here is art is inaccessible to most. And the examiner is asking you if you agree with this statement or not. So listen out for phrases like, do you agree with this? Do you think people are right when they say this? So when you're preparing for this part of the exam, think about these categories or grammatical functions and think about the vocabulary topics. How many of these grammatical function questions can you think of for each of the topics? When you think about your answers, it's a good idea to prepare all of the grammar that might be necessary. Think about each category of question and what language you might need to answer that type of question before the exam. So we mentioned that we have questions about the past. This would obviously include past simple, past continuous for something that was happening at a time in the past, past perfect for an event that occurred before a moment in the past passive forms. For example, before 200 years ago, medicine hadn't been invented. And used to and would to describe people's habits in the past. This is especially useful when you're comparing today and the past. You may be asked to talk about the future. We'd use present continuous for plans which are arranged for the future. So maybe you know about some scientific plans that are happening next year. We'd use be going to and will for predictions. Be going to is usually for predictions that have some evidence. Will, may, might, and could is for predictions that are just your own opinions. As well as this, we can use some expressions to show that you're not sure. I predict that this will happen. I guess this will happen. I envisage many people will do this, and I imagine for when you really have no idea. For imaginary or hypothetical situations, we would of course use second conditional and third conditional. Second conditional for situations that you could imagine happening being true now, and third conditional for situations which you could imagine having happened in the past, but didn't. It's also good to have a wide bank of opinion phrases to use in the exam. Just saying, I think, and in my opinion all the time is not going to sound very good in the exam. Phrases like I think, I believe, and I reckon. As far as I'm concerned, in my view, as I see it, and from my point of view. Part 1 is pretty informal in conversation, but because part 3 deals with quite global, serious topics, similar to a task 2 essay, your language will be a little bit more academic. This doesn't mean it has to be 100% formal. You can use some informal expressions, but generally the tone and the context is quite academic. For agreeing with a sentence, you might say, I totally agree with this. I think that's right. Yes, absolutely. Because, and then you'd give a reason. I guess so. I suppose so, if you're not 100% in agreement. For disagreeing, I totally disagree. Not for me. I don't think so. I'm not so sure about that, when you think you disagree, but again, you're not 100% sure. You want to acknowledge something as being true, but then give your own opinion. I see what they mean. So I believe they have a good point, but I feel that this is true. So the examiner might say something that you disagree with, and you want to politely show that this is a good point, but here's your opinion. I see what they mean, the people who say this, but in my view, this is true. I get what they're saying, but I see where they're coming from, but. So as well as that grammatical language, we also have language for the different functions of the different questions in part 3. This includes making comparisons between two things which are different, giving an effect and then explaining the cause of that effect, giving a cause and then explaining what the results or the effects are, talking about the advantages and disadvantages of something, and explaining problems and solutions. So for making comparisons, we have comparative and superlative forms, like the most efficient, much better than, not quite as good as. Whereas and while for contrasting two things with differences. And then, of course, language to show the difference between today and the past. In the past, they used to do this, but nowadays we do this. Language of effect and then cause. This is because of, this is down to, this is the result of, and this is due to. All of these phrases would be followed by a noun phrase. For example, this is because of tourism, not a sentence. Cause and effect. This leads to, this results in, and this causes. These three phrases are also followed by noun phrases. For example, this leads to global warming. So, and as a result, connect two clauses or two sentences. Advantages and disadvantages. On the one hand and on the other hand. This is a good way of showing two contrasting aspects of something. For example, if we were talking about working at home, we could say that on the one hand, working at home is very convenient because you don't need to drive to work. But on the other hand, it can be very lonely. However, can also be used to show contrast between two sentences. As well as this, it's good to have a range of synonyms for advantage and for disadvantage. So for advantage, we have upside and benefit. For disadvantage, we have downside and drawback. So, for example, one of the main downsides to working at home is that you don't have any social interaction with your colleagues. Problems and solutions. When we're talking about dealing with an issue, it's good to have a range of synonyms for deal with. Other possibilities are overcome or solve. So one possible way to deal with this issue would be to, again, conditional constructions are going to be very important for problem and solution questions. We also have, for giving recommendations and advice, should, could, and ought to. Now let's think back to those questions we saw before and try and use that useful language to start our answers. So number one is that advantage and disadvantage question we saw before. What are the pros and cons of cheap international tourism? Number two was that comparison question about lifestyles in the past and lifestyles today. Number three was that hypothetical or imaginary question talking about free university education, asking for your opinion. Question four, this was a future question. do you predict about technology and how it will change our lives in the future? Question 5 was asking about how to deal with a problem. The problem is some people are unemployed. And question 6, this was an agree or disagree question. Do you agree that art is inaccessible to most? I'm going to show you the start of some answers. I would like you to decide which question they come from. First, A. One possible way to tackle this issue could be to, which question is this starting to answer? Look at the next question below this video and choose the correct option. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. A is starting to respond to question 5. So the question is, what can be done to help people who are unemployed? One way to tackle this issue could be to invest money in training programs so that people are more qualified to find jobs. B. Well, on one hand, one of the main benefits is, which question is this starting to respond to? Look at the next question below this video and choose the correct option. B is starting to answer question 1. What are the pros and cons of cheap international tourism? Well, on one hand, one of the main benefits is that people from lower income backgrounds are able to visit other countries when they weren't able to in the past. However, one of the main drawbacks is that it's starting to affect local communities in popular tourist destinations. C. I would say it's a great idea as it would result in. Which question is this starting to respond to? Look at the next question below this video and choose the correct option. C is starting to respond to question 3. We can see this is a hypothetical question and we've got it would result in. I would say that is just a way of giving your opinion, and you can use this for any kind of question. So the question is, do you think the world would be better if everyone had a free university education? I would say that it's a great idea as it would result in a more educated population. If people are more educated, then they tend to be happier in life. D. I think that's absolutely true because which question is this starting to answer? Look at the next question below this video and choose the correct option. D is starting to answer question 6. Do you agree that art is inaccessible to most? I think that's absolutely true because most art is owned by private art collectors, so the public can't visit it. Therefore, it's pretty inaccessible to the average person. My answers were not complete, and I should definitely add more justifications, examples, and ideas to what I said. And you can practice this yourself before the exam. That is the end of this class. Now it's time to watch class 2 and then do the extra training and practice activities on this topic. Remember, if you have any questions, you can click on that chat icon at the top of your page there. You can send us a message with any questions that you have. Thank you for listening.